Alright, so this is my opinionated review on the Balaur Arms 14th century longsword. If you're like me and tried to look up information about Balaur Arms or their background, you probably came up with not much, just like I did. I believe there was one sword buyer's guide forum out there talking about the sword, but no in-depth review or look at how the sword actually performs. And that's why I'm making this video. If it weren't for reviews like this, I'd never be able to get to the point of knowledge that I have now about swords and stuff like that. And since I bit the bullet and decided to get the sword, I thought it was only fair to talk about it because I really do believe this sword has merit, but only for people that are looking for a solid, cheap sword. I will have timestamps if you'd like to skip to a desired point in the video that you wanted to see. And also, it's worth noting that Cult of Athena did make a review video on the sword as well. My only problems with it, though, is that they're not that in depth with the video. It was very short, and the review is also coming from a merchant, basically trying to sell you their product as well. So I don't know how faithful they'll be to the truth. But if you haven't seen it yet, I highly suggest you go see it, and I'll leave a link in the description below for their video. Now, as for the construction of this sword, either you'll be okay with it or you'll hate it. There are many flaws to point out, but none of them, in my opinion, are extremely detrimental to the sword. One of the biggest offenders for this sword is its overuse of epoxy. It looks like it's been used everywhere, but I think it's just from the grip and it overflowed onto the pommel and the crossguard, but regardless, it definitely deters from the look. The good news is that it was incredibly easy to clean up. It maybe took about a minute or 2 minutes to clean up the point that you see in this pic, and all I did was just take a knife and just clean up the pieces of epoxy that were overflowing. It wasn't that hard at all. The rest of the construction of the hilt, though, is very well done in my opinion. The pommel is peened, the grip is very comfortable with what looks like cord wrapped handle and then is like wrapped in leather. I don't really know, but it looks great and it feels great too. A slight disappointing part is how much space is between the crossguard and the blade. I was hoping for it to be a bit more flush, but for this price range I think that's a bit too much to ask. Because of this gap though, I think it caused the crossguard to be ever so slightly off. I can't really tell if I'm tripping or if it's actually crooked, but either way it doesn't detract from its performance or its look, especially when looking at it head on. As for the blade, I have to say that it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. When I found out that EN45 steel is basically the equivalent of 1045 steel, and the base of the sword was only 4.1 millimeters thick, and I didn't know what the tempering was going to be like, I was really worried that this thing was going to be subpar. To my relief, I was wrong. I chose the Cult of Athena sharpening service, so it was relatively sharp, definitely sharp enough for a cutting practice, considering that I accidentally slightly cut myself when inspecting the sword. But as for the blade's flexibility, I'd say it's very good. Enough to flex and bend however it needs, but not too whippy. Its point of balance is just like how the Cult of Athena statistics say, about 7¼ inches from the guard, which is pretty far out from what I've seen from other swords, but I don't think it really matters because from this area I feel like it gives you more cutting power. Besides, you really don't need that closer point of balance considering that the tip is not very acute for armor piercing and that extra control you get from the closer point of balance isn't really that important because of that. As for the scabbard, I really like it. It may just be me and how I think it aesthetically looks, but I just like how the top where the locket would be looks. The rest of the scabbard definitely looks like it has some downfalls. One I received had some smudges and marks at the shape, easily polishable though, but if that wasn't bad enough, there's some strange imprints right above the leather, and it may have just happened during shipping, but all of that is cosmetic damage, and since it's the lower half, it's barely even noticeable. One thing I would like to point out though is that although the addition of a sword strap is nice, it most likely will not fit you unless you're wearing some sort of armor like a thick gambeson or maybe even some plate. This is a ridiculous amount of space between the actual holes and where an average sized person would need to wear the belt. I'll probably just drill a hole in the belt if I ever felt the need to comfortably wear it. How well does the sword stay in the scabbard? At first, very snug. So snug that it wouldn't fall out and was almost hard to draw. But after drawing it multiple times now from the scabbard, it definitely has loosened up. I don't particularly mind, but I know some would prefer a scabbard that holds onto your sword no matter what. Now, remember how I was talking about how they really like to use epoxy? Well, guess what they have in their scabbards as well. Honestly, it's not even that bad, but I believe it's the source of this weird smudge I get every single time I draw the sword. Not a really big deal, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. On to the cutting tests. I'd like to preface this section by saying these points. 1. I don't have any real sword training. I've seen videos and read manuals, but this is actually my first time swinging a sword, so cut me some slack. 2, I live in a city, so that means the only real place to practice is my small tandem garage. That means that I can't do a full swing and I can't go into a full stance. I apologize beforehand that these tests won't be perfect because of this, but as long as I can give you an idea about the sword, then I'd say it's helpful enough. 3, I don't have any tatami mats, and I instead have newspaper cutting rolls because I have more access to newspapers than I do have on cash spending on tatami mats. The rolls I made for this video were inspired by a video Scabber made on cheap cutting targets. If you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description. This was actually the weakest roll I had, that's why I started out with this one. I knew I was going to be able to cut through it. The other rolls that I had were way stronger than this one, and actually most of them I didn't even get to cut through, but I'll show you the ones that I did get to cut through. The reason the rolls keep getting knocked off of the base is because my dowels aren't going in deep enough because I didn't drill it down deep enough, and that severely affected the rest of the rolls as well, and that's why I tried to hold it down with the yellow towel, but it didn't work. So as you can see here, this roll is a lot wider than the last one, and I was still able to cut through it. Same roll, different cut. I feel like this cut was even cleaner than the last one, besides it getting knocked off the base. This one was an honorable mention considering how well it dug in. From this point on, the tests were unsuccessful to say the least. It's obviously not as easy as just pick up a sword and swing, as I soon learned, but I did hope that some of these were helpful, and most of these ones that I'm showing that didn't work are not because of the sword at all. It's because either the base was bad, my edge alignment was bad, the swing was bad, there's not enough space, there's so many factors, but definitely, as I've shown, the sword can do it. The sword can cut. Alright, so my final thoughts. I like the sword. $200 is not a bad price for a longsword. In fact, it might even be the cheapest price. What you get isn't the greatest quality, but definitely worth mention if you don't have a longsword yet, or if you just want a functional longsword for this price. I think besides the minor defects, it looks really good too. More often than not, the sword will be displayed than in my hands, mostly because I won't be cutting with it 24/7, so it's nice to look at from time to time and admire it. So would I recommend it if you're a frequent sword buyer? No. You'd probably want to save up extra and get something that you'll really enjoy. Would I recommend it if you've never owned a longsword before? Yeah, most likely. I could definitely recommend a sword if you buy it through Cult of Athena, because if for some reason you don't like it, you can just send it back. Now, if you're looking for a sword that might be more reliable or something that is higher quality but looks relatively similar to this sword, I might recommend the Ronin Katana Euro 2. Kind of has the same structure and design of this sword, and it's only about $100 more. If you would like more information on the Euro 2, Skull did another video reviewing this blade. As you can see, I like to link things to more reputable sources because I, in fact, am not the most qualified for these things. I'm just a guy with a sword who want to let you know what his thoughts were on it. So if you're interested in this sword, I'll put the link to Cult of Athena for this sword and Skull's video in the description below. Well, this concludes the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I will be reading them. I really hope this helped you with your thoughts on the sword, and I hope you have a nice day. Peace.